Our first speaker today is Sara Horowitz. Sara, are you here?
I am indeed, Phyllis.
Oh, hi, Sara.
Hi,
Sara
Phyllis.
Horowitz is professor of comparative literature and humanities and former director of the Center for Jewish Studies at York University in Toronto. She had her earliest publication, Voicing the Void, has become a classic in Holocaust studies, and I dare say that all of us who have followed in her footsteps rely enormously on that work. She has continued to publish and to also serve as not only president of the Association for Jewish Studies, but that she occupies a wonderfully influential position on the Academic Advisory Committee of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Her talk today is titled Zadie in the Archives.
Thanks so much, Phyllis. It's so good to see your face. It's so good to see all your faces and hear these thoughtful papers. Several years ago, by fluke, I found a photo of my maternal grandfather, my Zadie, in a digital archive. I had spent several hours searching through several digitized collections of documents connected with shtetls in Eastern Europe for a research project. Before logging out, on impulse, I tried but failed to find some traces of my own family. Both my maternal and paternal ancestors and their extended families came to New York in the early part of the 20th century, some just before, some just after World War I. They embraced their new lives in the New World and worked hard to Americanize. They rarely told stories of the old country, except for my paternal grandfather, who spun legends of being rescued from the army by a flying horse and a monkey that spoke Yiddish. The few memories they did relate were laced with loathing for the world left behind, a world marked by poverty and fear. Their descendants inherited no nostalgia for that world. We became curious only when there was no one left to ask. I searched the digitized archives for some evidence of family presence in lists of Jewish businesses, births, conscriptions, and so forth, but I couldn't find any trace. Rather than come out empty-handed, I looked for some image of the world of my ancestors. I searched for photos of the town my mother's family came from, Kamenets-Litovsk, located in the present Belarus. And there he was, in a sepia-colored photo in front of the shtetl's wooden synagogue, my Zadie's face. Younger, of course, than I had ever known him, but unmistakable. He was standing in a row of 6 men and a boy, all looking straight ahead into the camera with the seriousness of expression one wore when photography was still a formal occasion. The only man with a shaved face, Zadie sported a jaunty cap and a tie. Why bring this story to this conference with its focus on Holocaust post-memory? My ancestors are not Holocaust survivors, except in some attenuated understanding that in choosing to immigrate well before the rise of Nazism, they escaped murder. Soon after the photograph was taken, my grandfather departed for New York with his young bride. Their siblings soon followed. That photograph, and indeed our familial memory more broadly, has a different emotional charge and different dynamics than family photos and stories of Holocaust survivors and victims. Using the serendipity of the archival photo as a starting point, I propose to consider different paradigms for relating to the chronotype, that is the space-time of familial memory, as a basis to interrogate the models of post-memory and the post-memorial. How do descendants write their family stories? How do they just inscribe themselves into it? Does Holocaust memory remain a distinct thread, or does it morph down the generations? And if so, how? Susan Sontag once wrote, "All photographs are memento mori, reminders of our mortality." Quote, "Precisely by slicing out this moment and freezing it, all photographs testify to time's relentless melt." Because of this melting away of time, the photo I came upon tells of a place and a time inaccessible to me. But if Sontag zeroes in on the way photographs call up our mortality and all that is lost, it is also true that photos can call the past to life inside of us, at least some version of the past. Theorizing the narrative connections between time and space that he terms chronotype, Mikhail Bakhtin explores what happens when we tell stories grounded in a particular place at a particular time. He muses, time takes on flesh and becomes visible for human contemplation. Space becomes charged and responsive to the movements of time and history and the enduring character of a people. Chronotypes thus stand, he continues, as monuments to the community itself, as symbols of it, as forces operating to shape its members' images of themselves. Inherent in Bakhtin's conception of chronotypes is the connection among space, time, identity, and memory. What I desired from the photograph that I found was some entry into a past that had so rapidly receded, the daily lives of my ancestors, the world of the shtetl encountering modernity. What was Zadie thinking as he posed for the photographer? Was this his everyday garb? Did he deliberately style himself as different from the other men? Why in front of the synagogue? Like so many recovered photographs, this one inspired narratives, however tentative and conjectural. It is in the nature of such photographs to suggest the possible retrieval of unrecounted memories that nonetheless lodge in the hearts of those who come after, something akin to post-memory. And here's where things get productively messy. I sent the photo around to my siblings and my cousins. When they wrote back to me, each of them read themselves into this image of our Zadie in his youth, as I did. Depending on how we defined ourselves, we each saw in the photo a different man, a Jew who would keep his religious traditions in the New World, a rebel who would redefine himself as an American, an adventurer, a modernizer, a man of great intuition, great daring, or great faith. In other words, we saw ourselves as present already in his past, generating narratives to interpret the photo, narratives that wove together space, time, identity, memory, and imagination. How does this connect to the themes of the conference? My grandfather's photo and the narrative interpretations that it generated reminded me of the rich and provocative way that Lori Lefkowitz captured the complicated relationship of children of survivors to their parents' stories as a kind of ventriloquism. As I read Lefkowitz, she describes a dynamic whereby the role of ventriloquist and dummy, if you will, keeps shifting. Parental memories put words in the mouths of their children. And in recounting these stories, children put words in the mouth of their parents. The impressive and growing body of work about the Shoah across disciplines and genres gives irrefutable evidence that one can, of course, write about the Shoah out of personal experience, transmitted knowledge, or research. As Sontag and Bakhtin and others suggest, however, something about narrating the past is always incomplete, unwritten. The past melts away from us, and we cannot seize its stories except through prisms born of our own inner spaces. And how much more so for narratives about the Shoah, laced with bereavement, absence, violence, and trauma. As Maurice Blanchot succinctly put it, the disaster describes. One tells the stories one can bear to tell in ways one can bear to tell them, called upon to call their parents and now grandparents and great-grandparents' stories rather than their own, second, third, fourth generation speakers recraft the past through their own interpretive lenses, just as the past infuses the present infuses the past. Thank you.